So the beginning is the glance. And all of this is based upon the Shari'ah. I don't think it's my personal inclination. You can go back and read the Shari'ah in great detail, and you will come to exactly the same conclusion as I come to, inshaAllah. The first thing is the glance. Because many people like to begin with the woman. The Qur'an begins with the opposite. قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ وَيَحْفَظُوا فُرُوجَهُمْ ذَلِكَ أَزْكَى لَهُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ خَبِيرٌ بِمَا يَصْنَعُونَ. Say to the believing men, lower your gaze. Wallahi, it doesn't make a difference to me what century you live in. The Qur'an says we're literalist people. We take the Qur'an literally. وَقُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. I want to be a believer. It says to the believing men, lower your gaze and guard your chastity, guard your private parts. So when people say to me, Ya Maulana, what about the television today? What about the satellite? What about the channels at the moment? The woman that comes on top of that channel, وَقُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ. Say to the believing men, lower your gaze. Lower your gaze. There's no difference of opinion. Who's trying to play with the Shari'ah now? Who's trying to play with the Shari'ah and say, well, ma fi haraj, there's no harm. The Qur'an is a direct statement. Simple statements. Say to the believing men, if you see a woman in front of you, lower your gaze. Khalas, we'll lower our gaze. We're not going to argue about that. ذَلِكَ أَزْكَى لَهُمْ. That's purifying for you. That's purifying. That's what you find a hadith that talk about. Person who lowers his gaze finds halawatul iman. Finds a sweetness of iman that you can't comprehend. But we've got a sickness in our hearts. We can't find that halawatul iman, that when you lower your gaze, you find a nur inside your heart. You find a good feeling that you're close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then comes the women. وَقُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنَاتِ يَغْضُضْنَ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِنْ وَيَحْفَظْنَ فُرُوجَهُنْ وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ إِلَّا مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا وَلْيَضْرِبْنَ بِخُمُرِهِنَّ عَلَى جُيُوبِهِنْ. And say to the believing women, lower your gaze. Lower your gazes in front of men who are غَيْرْ مَحَارِمْ, who are not related to you. وَيَحْفَظْنَ فُرُوجَهُنْ. And they preserve their private parts and their chastity. وَلَا يُبْدِينَ. And they never reveal their zina, their beauty or their adornments, إِلَّا مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا. Whatever accidentally could become apparent. From the hands or from walking, some aspect of a garment. مَا فِي حَرَجْ. Look at the relaxation of Shari'ah. That happens, مَا فِي حَرَجْ. No harm in that. وَلْيَضْرِبْنَ بِخُمُرِهِنَّ عَلَى جُيُوبِهِنْ. And tell them to cover their bodily parts. And the word is quite explicit to mention. That's the Shari'ah. So when people today are discussing about what's the role of the hijab, what's the role of the woman's dress, is it a bright pink color? Is it just a Calvin Klein hijab on the top of your head and wear tight trousers and say, I love Islam across your chest? Who taught you that Islam? Who taught you that type of Islam? Where does that come from? The Shari'ah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your own understanding of Islam. It's nothing to do with your own understanding, your own inclination. And that's what's happening in our society. Wallahi, sometimes I feel like just stopping and saying to somebody, you might as well take that hijab off your head. Don't hold a cigarette in your hand and smoke. Don't hold hands with a boy in the street. Don't behave in that manner. Because I know for a fact when I was growing up, I never joked about the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I had done something or I didn't do it. I didn't curtail myself behind some Islamic dress and understanding and pretend I'm trying to be Islamic, or this is Islamic dress. This isn't Islamic dress. This is fashion and culture. That's what you're following. You're following a fashion and a culture. You're not following Islam. So that the Qur'an is saying, cover yourselves with the correct form of the jilbab. The way of the believing women. Ya ayyuhan nabiyyu qul li azwajika wa banatika wa nisa'il mu'minin. O Prophet of Allah, say to your wives, say to your daughters and say to the believing women, yudnina alayhinna min jalabibihin. Tell them to cover their bodily parts. So somebody says, that's only for the Prophet's wives, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. But a verse is saying, say to your wives, say to your daughters, and say to the believing women. And your qudwa, Your person that you resemble is ummahatul mu'mineen, the mothers of the believers. That we resemble and copy them, and likewise the women should resemble and copy them. So quite basically, what the eye does not see, the heart does not perceive or desire. That's the proverb, that's the understanding. What the eye does not see, the heart doesn't desire, doesn't perceive that. You can't see something, you don't know nothing about it. You can't seem to do anything beyond that, because everything is sealed in front of you. And thus you find many athar, many such wordings. Some people like to attribute these as the words of the Prophet Muhammad, but they are da'if in nature. But the meaning is true. An-nadhratu sahmun min sahami iblis. The glance is from amongst one of the arrows of shaitan, of iblis. That's what ulama have highlighted. That's the beginning. That the glance is there. That is the arrow, the first arrow of shaitan. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la tattabi'u khutuwati shaitan. Oh, you believe, don't follow the footsteps of the devil. وَمَنْ يَتَّبِعْ خُطُوَاتِ الشَّيْطَانِ فَإِنَّهُ يَأْمُرُ بِالْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنْكَرِ. Whoever follows the footsteps of the devil, because shaitan only orders you munkar, evil things, and al-fawahish, illicit, all types of illicit sexual behavior. You find in the hadith, لَكَ الْأُولَى وَلَيْسَ لَكَ الثَّانِيَةِ. You have the first glance of sudfa, apparent glance. Somebody comes in front of you, you have that first glance. وَلَيْسَ لَكَ الثَّانِيَةِ. You don't have the second glance. But once again, that sickness, many of us say that, Mawlana, I'm still in my first glance. You think you're the only shabab. Read the seerah of the shabab, Hawlul Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Read the young men around the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You think you're the only one with temptation, desires. If my memory serves me correct, Ibn Abbas or one of the other companions riding, and his eye falls upon a woman, and he's glancing and he's fixing upon her. The Prophet Muhammad turns his face around. There's it again he turns his face around. Simplicity. That is what the Prophet Muhammad understood these people, and he highlighted that. لَكَ الْأُولَى وَلَيْسَ كَالثَّانِيَةِ. He said to Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. You have the first, but you don't have the right to follow that glance again. All of a sudden something comes apparent in front of you, turn away, glance away. And thus you find that if this was something shay basit, something trivial, then I don't think the Prophet Muhammad would have turned his companion's face away. Reflect upon that. It's something trivial, he wouldn't turn his beloved ones away, their face away, because he understands what could happen next. And thus you find that this concept of tabarruj, the concept of coming out in society, in one's ordainments, is nothing but a way of jahiliyyah, of ignorance. You find many ahadith, a woman who comes out of her home, not attiring herself correctly, is tasrafaha shaitan. Shaitan will glorify or beautify her. You find another hadith as narrated in Mustadrak of Imam Hakim, and checked by the late Sheikh Nasiruddin al-Albani rahmatullahi alayh. Any woman who comes out of her house, perfuming herself, every single eye that looks at her, فَإِنَّهَا هِيَ زَانِيَةٌ. She's an adulterous woman. أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. That's not my words. That's the words of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Any woman who comes out of her house, perfuming herself, and every man that smells her, then she's just classified, according to the Shari'ah, as an adulterous woman. And as you find in the hadith, as I mentioned previously as well, that many of the hadith are talking about our times as well. Al-Kasiyat al-Ariyat, dressed but naked. Visualize that yourselves today. Women that will be dressed but yet naked. That you can see everything about these women. And thus you find مَا تَرَقْتُ بَعْدِ فِتْنَةً أَضَرَّ عَلَى الرِّجَالِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ. The biggest fitna I've left behind for my people is women. That is the biggest fitna. The words of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فَاتَّقُوا الدُّنْيَا وَاتَّقُوا النِّسَاءِ فَإِنَّ أَوَّلَ فِتْنَةَ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيل كَانَتْ فِي النِّسَاءِ. Fear women, fear the dunya and fear women. Because the first thing that struck Bani Israel, the fitna that struck them was women.